Well, happy holidays. And today we're going to make sure you have happy holidays because I'm going to show you how to enjoy the holiday season, not have it where you binge a bunch, not have it where you're way, way farther back than you want it to be starting in the new year. And it's also in a situation where you don't feel like you got to count your macros at every single family gathering and feeling like you're withholding. We're trying to have the right amount of enjoyment. That's the key. It's not going all out, it's not abstaining everything. It's just what is that? The good old Goldilocks zone, the Goldilocks Christmas. That's what we want you to have. So you feel like you got to really have an experience there, but at the same time, you didn't feel like you went all out, right? What's really important to know is that typically most people will gain the weight over the holidays and just not lose it all year long. So if we can have the holidays something where even let's say you maintain your weight, you're actually probably getting one good foot in front of the other starting into the new year and your fitness goals. So let's dive into it. So we have some obvious problems within the winter and the holidays. Being that it's winter, it's cold out. You don't have as much accountability. There's no the weather itself. Look, I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. The weather sucks. It's just starting to get a little bit cold out, but it's going to get colder, guaranteed, and it's a long time. And even if it's not cold where you're at, a lot of people can end up being less accountable, even if it's slightly colder. Now, beach season, so ain't got to take my shirt off. I'm a little less accountable. It's the sweater weather. You feel good in sweaters, and it kind of lies to you about your physique. And then you also got these holiday dinners. You got the holiday food that seems to only come around once a year. So I have to eat it, right? That's the thing that we're going to try to outsmart. We're going to try to get beyond these scarcity mindsets. And then there's stress because as much as we want to enjoy the holidays, we get to see our family. But is that a good thing? Because sometimes you got some family members that actually lead to your stress eating. And then sometimes you have your family members that give you the food that lead to more eating, right? So it depends on everything else going on and how your stress levels are going into the holidays. We also have an issue of days feeling shorter. So naturally, you're going to be more lethargic. This is the winter season of hibernation instinctively. And sometimes it's not just one dinner, it's many dinners. And then there's even the why the fuck not zone, which is right after Christmas and before New Year's. Like, why not? Like, why do I care? I'll just start New Year's. And that's the most dangerous part because that's where it adds up so much. And you get in the holiday mindset because of it. So we're going to attack our strategy around all of these problems. Quick overview here so you understand kind of the game plan today. We're going to talk about your stress levels, how stressed you are going into an event. As I mentioned, you could have some family members that are making you eat. You could have some family members that are making you drink, or sometimes you want to drink with your family members or you want to eat with your family members. So we got to think about those things. And that's the social culture part as well. And so from there, we got to think about how we're going to be accountable to this. What's the support system that we have that's going to make sure that we're having the right amount of food? And are they going to support it? And we got to consider the environment. Is the environment set up for us to actually do this? From there, we want to have a solid plan. When you consider all those elements, then let's make our plan. Are we going to have a deficit, actually try to lose body fat over the holidays, which is a brave thing, but possible thing. Maybe you just want to maintain, which is a wonderful goal. It's one that I'm going to recommend the most. And then maybe you do want to build muscle, but we don't want the dirty bulk. So we're going to talk about the difference in that. And then we also have to have the day of plan, right? So maybe it's a Christmas day. It could be Christmas Eve. It could be New Year's Eve. It could be whatever holiday you celebrate that is essentially the challenge for you. And we're going to talk about how we can actually plan our calories around that. From there, we want to make sure right after we have a recovery mindset, which is going to be really imperative because there's quite often leftovers. And then you start craving them even more after because you're just used to it. And then lastly, we got to talk about training. We're going to talk about training volume. What's the benefit? We don't want to punish ourselves. So we're going to dive into all this and it'll give you a solid rubric on how to move forward. Stress level going into it. Well, what kind of stresses do you have? I mean, you got work. Work tends to actually pile up this time of year for some people, especially because so many people are trying to go to the holidays. So they're giving you work. Maybe someone's already on the holidays. So you got their work and then this person going on holidays and then you want to go on holidays. Wow. I think I'd want to eat right now too, right? Not to mention if you're at work, they're probably giving you a bunch of the holiday baking already. From there, you also got to consider family relationships. Is this the people that you want to see, or is it the people that you have to see? And sometimes, if not both times, you can end up wanting to eat more food because of that situation. So it's something to mentally prepare for. So if you're trying to set whatever goal up, We got to make sure we don't have too many stresses around that part of the environment. And then you got to consider your training. Is more training going to be hard for you? Because we're going to talk about training volume, but that could be a bad stress if you expect yourself to get all your workouts in and expect perfection when you got this, this, and this. So we got to consider that part. And then your nutrition plan on top of all of this. Let's make it realistic is my main point here. So we first got to consider the basically almost the uncontrollable stresses, and you work your way into the controllable stresses. And then you want to manage it accordingly. Be aware of what's the most realistic for your diet and training plan, given the other things are far more difficult to actually control. Social culture is a super important part of your lifestyle and your existence. It's your family culture. It's your culture, right? Culture is a huge part of your identity. So I am Norwegian. We have something called lefse. Lefse is basically like a tortilla, but it's made from potatoes. And get this, we put butter on it and sugar. Like, I don't know who the hell invented this, especially putting butter and sugar together. And then we put it on the kitchen table as a part of dinner. And I knew this as a little chubby. And I'm like, this is dessert, guys. No one has a problem with this? Okay. I will eat my lefse because I am supposed to have this at dinner and it's not dessert. Now, at this day and age, I'm well aware that the butter and sugar and potatoes is not necessarily the healthiest thing, but it is a huge part of my social culture and my family culture. So I'm going to include that even just a little bit. And my girlfriend is Filipino. You better believe that when I go to her family dinners, I'm going to be trying all of their different foods. There's so many delicious foods. And guess what? Majority of them are not that healthy, or they're very calorie dense. So you have to take into consideration just the right amount of these foods so that it makes sense. So when you go into this, start thinking right off the bat, what is your weakness? What is something that you actually have a hard time not having the right amount of? So mentally preparing for it. And then what should you eat? If someone offers you, for example, in my case, lefse, or if it's something that Tita, my girlfriend's mom, actually offers me, I have to prepare myself for having that type of food. Are there family concerns around certain things that you want to eat or not want to eat? And then you might need to prepare people for the saying of no. And this was a huge thing last year when I did a prep, that my girlfriend's mom actually always wants to feed me, but she had to tell her, look, he's going after a goal. You have to let them know that no is already insinuated most of the time. And they'll understand that if they really care about you and your goals. Because you got to remember that your family members are only mainly asking you to eat certain foods that inherently might be unhealthy because they want you to enjoy things. They care about you. Hey, here, have something that actually makes me happy. Is that really trying to get you? No, they're not trying to actually get you. They're trying to give you happiness because it's a happy form for them. So for yourself, you just need to make sure you set your values straight with them prior to these events if it's really important to you. And cultural foods can just be enjoyed, but it's with the right amount with accountability. So more smaller portions and having a variety of foods is usually going to help you, and focus on the experience, not being stuffed by them. We're going to talk a lot about that in this whole presentation. You don't have to track, but maybe try to count your servings of the things that you're having. Now, before going into this event, as I mentioned, all these challenges, something that's going to help you is accountability and support. Because with all your good intentions, having someone on your side and knowing you're not in this alone will be super impactful for you. Think about how many times you've had an intention on your own to do something when it comes to your nutrition or fitness. You didn't tell anyone. And then you ended up putting it off. Oh, I was going to start going to the gym tomorrow, but I guess I'll just do it tomorrow. And then it's the next day, and then it's Wednesday, and you're like, I'll start next week. And that's actually how most of the efforts towards whatever you're going towards ended up, because you're the only one holding yourself accountable, and it just doesn't really end up working as well. That is because you lie to yourself more effectively than any other person in the world, because you're far more comfortable with rationalization. And if you have to tell someone that you have an intent, and even if they're not doing anything else to hold you accountable other than they know what your actions are, it's enough for you to be honest with your actions and to actually think, okay, if I told this person I'm going to do this, I should really want to be who I say I'm going to be. And that alone is super impactful. So ask for a friend, ask for an accountability buddy, where you just ask your friend, hey, you know what? I'm doing this throughout the holidays. I just want to tell you I'm doing it. You can tell me what you're doing if you want. And that'll at least help both of you just simply from sharing that challenge together and knowing you're not in it alone makes it so, so impactful. So tell someone about your plan, very effective. And even if you're not both doing it, but if you're both doing it, it's super, super effective. Your environment is something you really got to have a heads up going into it. So knowing what you're going into, when I had mentioned all these things about having social culture, having the stresses. So know what you're going into with this. What are you going to be tempted by the most? Knowing what kind of foods, I have certain foods, certain cookies that I'm going to want to have a little bit more of. I'm trying to only have so many dips of the shrimp ring. I can eat so many of those. And it's not so much the shrimp that gets me. It's that cocktail sauce. It's that shrimp cocktail sauce, which you might think, shrimp's high protein, which it is. And that's how I disguise it for myself. But it turns out that shrimp cocktail sauce is just ketchup and horseradish. So it tastes delicious because it's ketchup. And I grew up basically guzzling ketchup. Not the point. So practice saying no, practice have an idea of what's going into your environment and being aware of this is my intention going into it, and being able to be okay with that no. When someone say, are you sure you don't want some more? Be completely okay with that. Be okay with being a little bit different. And once you start identifying that you're going to be different, it's actually okay. It doesn't feel as awkward as you think. For years, my siblings and my parents started to get, they started to realize I always have these different diets, or I was strict at certain times. And then they would just always ask me, are you okay to eat this? And at first I almost took offense to it. But now I recognize, well, thank you for worrying about me, for recognizing I have values and that you can accommodate them, because they are just interested in making sure that you're happy. So people are going to be more supportive than you realize in the long run. Okay, let's do a plan here. So if you're planning for the holidays, what do you think it would be? It would either be a deficit or you're losing body fat. We could maintain our weight, or we could focus on some muscle building. Now, a lot of people try to have some ambition here, or some people have zero ambition, and we want to have somewhere in between. But what I want you to consider is, what is your likelihood of success in whatever you're going after? The holidays is where, as I had already mentioned, that most people gain their weight and they just don't lose it all year. So if you just don't gain weight over the holidays, you're doing terrific. Now, if your goal is, I still want to lose body fat, I'm still in that mindset, it is doable, but it's very difficult. And it's a very brave thing to do. We'll still give you that game plan. We'll still give you the outline today, but just think more reasonably when it has to do with knowing yourself and knowing your social culture, and to see how you could actually maybe have a little bit of an in-between where you have some deficit days. And then at the end of the day, you feel like you actually just haven't gone backwards. And again, you're starting on the right track in the new year. So the deficit over the holidays, that's a brave thing to do, but we're going to talk about how you can make it work. But I'm also really going to get people to think about the challenges and whether or not it is suitable to their situation. Because if you have a lot of social events and you want to enjoy a lot of these social events, it's going to be really difficult. You can do it and still enjoy dinners, but you have to caution that binge bubble. The binge bubble is basically where things start to add up. You're trying so hard and pops, and then you just say, fuck it, and you go way harder the other way. So I used to do this. This is a funny story. I used to do this all the time before the holidays, and it was a really fun way to mess around with my fitness, but it was super psychologically unhealthy. Basically, what I would do is I would actually diet and exercise really well going into the holidays for about 4 to 5 weeks. And it was actually a great way to keep me accountable during my exams. And then when the exams were done, the last day of exams, I said I could honestly binge. I would drink, I would smoke weed and eat anything. I would intentionally almost always bake cookies and eat a lot. And I mean a lot of cookies. And mostly I would only get through about half of the cookie dough to bake it, because I would eat half the cookie dough raw and then being sick for days. But I was just allowing myself to have a binge zone. I used to joke about how I would go on the wagon, and then it was like I was jumping off the wagon. And for a moment, it felt like I could fly until I hit the ground extremely hard for the next few days. And I wouldn't recommend it, because that was actually where I started binging more and more and more. So if you're going to do this, make sure everything lines up where your plan makes sense. And you're going to want to start within the next 2 weeks, or within this week leading into the 2 weeks up, because your deficits now actually make a huge impact so that you can actually ease into it. And we're going to plan the right amount of maintenance days, and we're going to even prepare your mindset so we actually do a little bit of a reverse diet into it. And just again, consider whether or not you could maybe use a diet break, because we're only really talking about maybe slowing down your fat loss for a week or two. That's really it. And you could actually enjoy your foods that much more. But if you are doing it, you're going to need to consider a mini reverse diet prior to the events. And you'll see what I'm talking about when I go over the calories as we move forward. So I'm going to go over the calories on every one of these plans. And this is just kind of an outline of some of the things you got to consider if you're going to go for a deficit. Now, the maintenance goal, this is what I'm talking about. This is the best hope for most people. And this is where I think you should probably be aiming for, because it's a modest and honest approach. If you have lots of events and you really want to enjoy rather than abstain, you feel like it's going to add a ton of stress, then let's make it manageable. Maintenance is a great idea because it is a way for you to actually still have accountability. You still have a lot of your plan that you're working around it. But then at the events, you actually get to kind of treat yourself, treat yourself. And there's two ways that you can do this effectively. One is just eat maintenance every day, which is probably really, really difficult. I can't even do that. Or we're going to work on the ebbs and flow model, and you'll see what I'm talking about in the calorie balancing out, because we're going to have ebbs and flows within our medium to low calorie days and slightly higher calorie days. And it is not a yo-yo. I don't believe in yo-yos. I believe in ebbs and flows, which just basically means that there are higher and lower calorie days. You have the right amount of ebb and flow to prevent the yo-yo. So I want to make another case here for why do a maintenance. Why would maintenance be so good? And there's a lot of great points here. Metabolic adaptation is one. So let's say you've been doing a deficit for a long time. When you've been doing a deficit for more than 2 to 3 months, even a month, you can get into your body actually slowing down your metabolism. Now, it can be somewhat subtle, but it does make a difference. And if you actually take a week or two to refeed your system, you could start to make the adjustments to have a new energy level. And what ends up happening is it's your NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically your body's habit of shifting or moving around. And it's things that you do unconsciously. Your job is a part of NEAT because you just naturally will do it. Now, if you're a sedentary worker, you're definitely not going to fidget much. But if you're a contraction worker, you actually have a high NEAT. But regardless, your body will actually try to slow that down if you've been in a deficit for a long time. So if we have more calories over the course of a diet break, we can actually help the body adjust from that. And more than anything, psychologically, right? Refeeding your system is basically what it is. And I would say more than anything, there's a lot of debate whether or not this is actually scientifically proven. Some show it, some don't show it. But I'll say that even with the whole, you're going to probably recover better from workouts. You'll probably replenish your muscle glycogen better, but you're also going to replenish your mindset way better. You're going to refeed this and this a lot more, right? Going into the danger zone right now, if you've been coming off a deficit for a few weeks, high palatability, meaning you want to eat a lot of it because it tastes good. Low satiety, meaning you want to eat a lot of it because it doesn't make you feel full enough. And there's a huge abundance, right? So if you're deprived in this system, you're in a deficit, you've been deprived for a while, this is going to be a major challenge for your willpower. So let's try to think about how we can manage this. One of the major things that I really like diet breaks for maintenance weeks is because you practice the right amount of food. The amount of people who go through yo-yo dieting and just in general, who can't really get their weight where they want it to be, I ask them, do you know the right amount of calories to eat where you don't lose or gain? And most of them don't know. They don't even know the experience of it. They don't know what that food feels like. So if we can practice having the right amount of food, and in these scenarios, what it would be like for 2 to 3 weeks go by, you having some splurges and to still actually have a net zero, that's actually a pretty sweet instinct to have, because you're going to have other occasions, and we want to prevent the yo-yo as much as we can. One of the major challenges with the yo-yo is we just don't know how to have the in-between. And if we get used to the feeling of the right amount of food, you have a better chance of actually responding to your intuition and holding your fitness long-term. And of course, there is the muscle building goal. And this is an important one to talk about because this is where people can go way off the rails and feel justified doing it. You probably know someone, or you could be the someone that likes to go to McDonald's a few extra times in the winter before the workout, maybe even after the workout, smashing the McDoubles saying, yeah, but I'm bulking, bro. Gotta get those calories, gotta get that energy. And you're really full of shit. You're just super pumped that it is winter and no one's taken off their shirts for a while, and you can feel good about pigging out because you're bulking, which is really ludicrous because it's super easy to have more calories right now. There's no question in that. You don't need to go McDonald's to do it. And for the most part, the calories are just in high abundance everywhere, whether it's Christmas or not. So right now it's even harder to not have too many calories. And what's really valuable is it's not that many more calories to have more muscle. Like you don't actually get more muscle because of that extra McDouble. The only people who really need this are if they're football players trying to gain actual body fat as well. So let's say that you have a calorie requirement for your calories around 2,000 calories. Let's just say your anabolic threshold, meaning just the top of the calories where you really need a bit more in order to build, is probably 2,200. Some people, it might be 2,400. Okay. That is a couple, maybe a granola bar and an apple and a banana, and you're already there. Now, you didn't need a McDouble for that. You absolutely didn't. And so when we're thinking about muscle building, I don't use the term bulking because people can be very, casual with the whole idea and get into bulking, bro. And I don't like that. I want you to think, hey, if I'm muscle building, I'm very intentful and I still care about my calories. And we want to avoid the fuck it's. And I'm speaking to myself here. I'm not being so critical and saying that I'm not guilty of this. I'm super, super guilty of it because it does feel like a justification of like, well, yeah, no, like I'm entitled to this, right? Because I'm bulking. And that is a super ignorant way of thinking about it. So you want to set up your week for some freedom, but we don't want to go so far back that we end up putting on an excessive amount of body fat. And we want to have this around the days before and after, where there's, again, it's going to be some ebbs and flows, and you can still splurge on these days. We want to lean bulk. We don't want to be bulking, bro. So we're going to look at a deficit calendar here if someone required 2,000 calories for the calorie maintenance, and then we're going to kind of review if they had a 500 calorie deficit, typically is what I would recommend in that scenario. Somewhere's around 15 to 25%. 20% is a really nice zone for most people relative to their actual body weight. And so this person has 500 calorie deficit. They're going at least 6 days in a row, and that's this week. That's the 11th to the 17th. But then on the 17th, and it could be on the 15th or 16th, but one of those days, I do recommend you do maintenance calories, is that's how I get most of my clients to set up their routine. Sometimes they might even do 2 maintenance days, but I recommend just 1 on this so that you set yourself up that much more for some good body fat loss in the week. Then the next week, this is where we're going to change it. We started a calorie deficit on the 18th. Throughout all the way up to Thursday, we do calorie deficits of 500, but then we do the mini reverse diet on the 22nd, 23rd. And so that means we're just bringing up 200 calories. And then we go on the Friday, 1,800 calories. So you're still losing some body fat on those days. But on the 24th, we're now at the maintenance calories we want. And what this is really doing is this actually might prevent that binge bubble a little bit, because people tend to just kind of hold off. And then they'll eat maintenance calories. And it's really, really hard psychologically. And I'll tell you, the only time I could ever have that kind of willpower is if I was in a competition for bodybuilding. And even then I wouldn't want to do it, but at least I would have some sort of a competitive haul. But most people are doing this for fitness and lifestyle. Like, you're not going to have that kind of willpower. So try to have something that's really realistic for you. From there, I would do probably maintenance calories on the Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. Maybe it's just one of those days. Now, one of the alternatives here is kind of having the equating balance here. So let's say you don't have much on Christmas Eve. Maybe it's more Christmas Day, or vice versa. You don't have much Christmas Day, 1 on Christmas Eve. You see that you have room for your calories at this point because the person has done a deficit for a week or so. Maybe you do 2,500 calories and it wouldn't be a calorie, deficit on that day, and you would have a little bit of a surplus. I do encourage you to have some room in it, but just know that each respective day that you have more than that would be, canceling out the other day of hard work. So it's what suits you more appropriately. Right after Christmas, I would recommend they go into their deficit because they would come off of 2 possibly good filling maintenance days, couple deficit days. Then once again, maybe a reverse diet on the Saturday so that they actually feel a little bit better. And then the maintenance on the New Year's completely depends on how your holidays go. I personally celebrate on the New Year's fair bit, so that's how I would set it up as well. One thing I didn't put in here, but I should mention, I would recommend this individual, even with a fat loss goal, is maybe on the 26th, that should also be maintenance calories. Again, depending on how really competitive you are with yourself, because that's probably going to be one of your hardest days, is Boxing Day. It's right after. So to actually ease into it, maybe you do 1,800 and you reverse the reverse diet. You go ease back into the diet itself. So that's another recommendation. And the person could be back on track the week after. Now, the realistic one to me, the maintenance calories. Now, there's a million ways up the same hill. You could do this in so many different fashions, but this is roughly how I would set it up. And bear in mind, I'm also coming from the reference of someone who has fat loss goals, but we're going to ease into more of a diet break over the course of the holidays. And so during the week of Christmas, the week after Christmas, we don't have those same ambitious goals, but we want to ease our way into a diet break and ease our way back into our calorie deficit. So as you see here, we're starting off with the calorie deficit. Same idea. You're going to have 500 less calories per day. They have maintenance calories on the Sunday. The next week, they actually come up a little bit and they intentionally have around 1,800 calories. So this is much less of a calorie deficit, but you still have a lot of room for calories because of it. And so typically you're somewhere around 200 calorie deficit per day, quite easy to actually manage. You won't feel so deprived going into it. Now, again, there's a million ways you could do it. Maybe you start with deficits on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then you bring it up to 1,800. It kind of has to suit your lifestyle and your routine. And the more beneficial part of that is if you were to do the 1,500 on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, is you do have more room for error when you have your occasions. And you'll see in this scenario, I intentionally give you room for error because you're starting a calorie deficit on the first week. We're ending off the first month with a calorie deficit week, but I'm also encouraging a pretty good splurge here of 3,000 calories on both Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And I think that's not unrealistic. That is super easily done at some events, especially if you have more than one event. I'm pretty sure I got back-to-back events this year, and it ain't going to be pretty, but it's going to be pretty delicious. So having some sort of a plan around this where you have that room for error is really the goal, but having your calories not making you want to binge is the real art form, if you will. So I would recommend you try something like this. And then you'll notice that, again, it's just a subtle deficit for about 5 to 6 days. And then you have your splurge day on Christmas Eve and on Christmas Day, depending on how you feel. This is a big one I mentioned already, and I would even increase it a little bit more on Boxing Day. I say 1,800 calories, depending on how you feel, maybe a subtle deficit or maybe a maintenance day, depending on how you feel. I will honestly make that as an emotional decision because I also encourage that to mostly be whole foods. And we're going to talk about how that strategy is super important to come back from the holidays because, from the 25th to the 31st is that why the fuck not zone. So we want to have some sort of an idea of making sure we don't just go right into all the junk food right away again. Now, from there, a bit more of a calorie deficit on the Tuesday and on the Thursday. Then we do the reverse diet again, getting ready for New Year's, and then reverse the reverse diet into starting our new deficit again into the new year. So that's the one that I would mostly recommend to a lot of people for the maintenance calories. Now, the muscle gaining, the bulking bro, to actually not just to be a bulking bro, but to have a lean bulk or muscle gaining phase. This is roughly what I'd recommend. Now, most people, I'm going to have in a subtle surplus going into the holidays, right? So their typical week here, you would see that they're doing 2,200 calories. Now, you don't have to do this. This is just something that I have found that works for me more recently is that one day a week, maybe two, but usually one during the week, I'll have a slight deficit day. So it just, when I'm not doing strength training on, say, a Wednesday, I don't have a training that day, I'm not worried about my anabolic muscle building stimulus. I will have slight deficit. You don't have to do this. You can eat the same calories every day, but this is something that helps me just remind myself I can actually not eat food. And at the same time, it helps me stay a little bit leaner. And then I go back into that slight surplus for the next 4 days, going into the next week, similar. Now, the major difference here is really just having about 4 days prior controlling the calories more. So you'll notice next week, they start in a slight surplus on the Monday, Tuesday, but on the Wednesday, which is a typical deficit day, they stay there. And then there's maybe a maintenance on the Thursday. Maintenance to the deficit on the Thursday, Friday is roughly how I recommend it. So it's kind of the reverse diet. It's like you're actually slightly going into a bit of a deficit just for a few days prior to the event. And then if you're going to have those 3,000 calories on the 2,400, on the 24th, on the Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, you have a little bit more room for error in your calories. Now, are you going to put on body fat? Probably. Is it super significant? Probably not. And this is just a great way to manage it. Now, the next week after, in the why the fuck not zone, to make sure we do give a fuck, that's where I recommend you start with maintenance calories. Maybe one of those days, again, you just choose to have a slight deficit. Like if your typical day is a deficit day on a Wednesday, I would do it on that 27th, the day after Boxing Day, so you can kind of get in a good groove there, bring it into those slight surplus calories again. And hopefully you feel pretty content with the amount of calories you had at this point. And by the time you have New Year's Eve, maybe it's just a slight surplus, 2,500 calories. You can keep it reasonable and you can get back into your routine on the following week. So this is roughly what I recommend for a muscle building phase. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly this, but it's still the ebbs and flows. It's still to have a few lower calorie days, to have some room for higher calorie days, but make sure that you still have a concept of what the upper range of your calorie requirement is. And we're going to talk about how it's not the end of the world if you go over, but at least if you set yourself up, I know you'll feel that much better about enjoying the holidays, but preventing that binge bubble more than anything. So I got some day of food strategy principles that we want to talk about so that you dive into this day in whatever respective a day. It could be Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, it could be New Year's Day, and you have some good principles to go into it. And the major thing is leave room, but don't starve. Like, let's have some room in our calories on that respective day, but then on the evening, we can actually enjoy ourselves because we had a base, especially of protein. You're not going to want to overindulge, right? So protein leveraging is going to be our major tactic here, which is essentially to anchor each meal with more than enough protein. Each meal leading up is going to be around 50% protein if we can. And then on top of that, using some protein shakes where you can. Some people like to do it right before the event. When you're driving into that event, having a protein shake. I actually am going to talk about how it's helpful after the event, and because that can actually help you pull out of it. It's important to know that protein shakes will not be better than meat itself when it comes to satiety in a short term, but it can actually help in terms of the palatability because for me, it tastes good and it's super convenient. Now, let's have a plan for the day of the event. And what's really going to make a big difference here is we want to go in with some room in our stomach, room in our calories, but not to be starving going into the event, because then that's going to lead into that binge bubble that I'm going to keep talking about. So here's the first style that works quite commonly well for a lot of people, because we don't want to starve going all the way to that event and then just splurge, because that is going to be extremely hard to control yourself. If you imagine not eating in the Sahara Desert for many weeks and someone gives you a cracker, like a whole buttload of crackers, you're even going to binge soda crackers because you're so hungry. Now, I'm not saying it's the exact same thing, but there is a natural intuitive instinct that when you push a deficit too hard, even within a short amount of time, you're going to want to go that much harder the other way as soon as you're around calories. But the window eating is just push it a little later. So basically, skip your breakfast. I find this works quite well for me because then the next respective meals can actually be much larger. A couple of different ways that you can do this, but one simple system is to think about eating breakfast a little later, around 11 or 12. And that first meal, we want to have a high amount of protein with lower carbs and fat. So think about the respective calorie maintenance being around 2,000, again, as I mentioned before. And therefore, that person want to have around 40 to 60 grams of protein. I want you to protein anchor it, have more than enough protein in it, because you're still going to use the protein for some energy as well as muscle building and just extra satiety. I call it protein anchoring it. I've heard a lot of people call it protein anchoring, and it works because you're leveraging the protein to actually help your appetite, having more than enough. And so typically you would have somewhere around 500 calories, but if you have 60 grams of protein, that's almost 50% of the calories coming from the protein, and it's going to be pretty filling. Now, the next meal could be around 3 or 4, and it could be even a higher protein snack with even fewer calories. It could be even denser in the protein. Now, this depends on when your event is, but let's just say that this is Christmas Eve, and this is how you would set it up so that you go into there and you actually did have something prior to the 6 o'clock cocktails. So you're not just like wanting to binge on everything. It's a great way to actually set yourself up for it. Then you can enjoy your dinner. And then what I actually recommend to a lot of people is consider a protein shake after the event. Now, let's say you're at your Christmas dinner or Christmas Eve dinner and you want to reach for another cookie or you want to reach for another one of these or these. But then you think, wait a minute, when I get home, I can have another protein shake. is if I'm really hungry, that's all I need. And maybe just a little bit more protein. I've had a good amount of food, and planning on a protein shake will actually help you with the power to withdraw from a high abundance of food. Just make sure you like your protein shakes. And then a normal plan is to actually do basically the same thing, have a high protein breakfast, have a higher protein lunch, same kind of thing, around the same amount of kind of calories, enjoy your dinner. It's just going to be a bit bigger of a gap between the lunch and your cocktail dinner. And this really has to do with when you can eat and when you're comfortable with eating. So typically when I do the windowed eating, I do feel like it's a little bit easier for me to not go in and want to binge as soon as I get to an event. And once again, I still recommend that evening protein shake. Now, event strategies are going to be critical because you want to have a strategy for when you're around the food. The very first thing is the hardest thing when it has to do with your appetite because it's in the fucking name. Appetizers. What a brilliant design for these assholes to figure out in the food industry. What if we just give them a little bit of stuff to make them unaware that they're eating a ton of calories and it's bite size and there's a variety of them? We'll give them some sauces. They're going to love it. And we do love it. And that's the worst part. Now, let's have some principles here. First rule of thumb is fill up on veggies as much as you can. One of the things I try to do is I have a serving of veggies and then I try something else. So I always mix in the veggies 2-to-1, even sometimes, at least 1-to-1, if not 2-to-1. Then from them, I actually just try to caution anything that has breading or sauces added to it. And it's not that I don't, I'm just aware. Caution is not doing it. It's just being aware that that is going to make it calorie dense. The other thing I will say that try to have a number of appetizers you think is appropriate. And it could be maybe 3, it could be maybe 2, it could be 5, but have a specific number that you're aware of. Okay, that's a pretty good amount of calories. If you imagine whatever you depict the calorie sizes are, it could be around 100 to 200 calories per appetizer. And if you had 5 of them, you're already going to be around 5 to 1,000 calories. So that's why you want to have a very specific number in the appetizers to help you regulate how much you're having, and then just hold a little bit more for the dinner. Now, the dinners themselves, here's the major thing: protein anchor. It's not a brilliant thing. And again, just the serving sizes are going to be good. So you have a plate size, 30 to 40% of protein. Something that people typically don't realize is you want the lean protein, and something like meatballs isn't necessarily lean protein because meatballs will actually come with ground beef, and ground beef is already 40% protein. I'm not saying not to have it. Now, I would still have several meatballs. I love meatballs, but it's already a fatty meat that has sugar on it with the sauce. So if you have a lean meat, have a lot of lean meats, if it's turkey or if it's chicken, because that will be more beneficial as far as protein anchoring the meal that much more. Have a little bit of everything. That's the way that it's always worked for me. Whatever you think a normal serving is, have half that, especially if there's a variety of food, because you'll fill up that plate really quick. As many salads and veggies as you want, possibly. Like, don't have any restriction on the salad. Maybe even have 2 or 3 servings of the salad. Have more veggies and have that for food volume and bulk. It's going to help so much more for just that food volume and help you digest your food better. And drink as much water before, during, and after. Trying to take breaks as you're eating your food to drink water will actually help you digest this food significantly more. Calorie assumptions, you can do them and not do them. But if you think about it, you don't really have to track. Like, I personally have never tracked at a family gathering. I have just ballparked things. But the assumption is somewhere around, as I mentioned, 100, 200 calories per serving of food for a half a cup or a cup. Now, if it has fats or carbs or it's deep fried, then we're going to lean towards 200 to 300 calories. And I just try to use the plate portions. And if I have a plate and it's full and I use the design, as I just mentioned, a lot of vegetables, a lot of meat, and a little bit of all the other stuff, I'm going to feel pretty full after that. And it's going to be around 1,000 calories very quickly. Now, an event recovery tip, and this recovery just means for digestion. That's what these are mainly doing. These are not necessarily going to do away with the calories that you already consume. I just want you to physically feel better so that you can go back to action, get a good night's rest so you don't feel super bloated at bed and get all the meat sweats or whatever the sweating comes from that. And you can actually just feel better about the whole occasion. First one is, I had already mentioned, is drinking more water during the event. You actually want to drink water before, during, and after, and especially after, because if you had a lot of carbs, the muscle glycogen, the water retention, actually comes from that, but it's actually just going to push the carbs through your system a lot more. So try to drink a lot more water, especially after the event. And then try to walk if you can. Now, I know it's winter, it might be cold. If you can get even a 20-minute walk in, it'll make such a difference. I remember I went to Mongo's Grill not too long ago. First time I ever been. Great place. You actually get to go serve yourself some food and you get to choose the food that they cook for you. And that is ideal. I love buffets. You know, the little fat kid in me is like, there's no restriction. I am my own restriction. This is amazing. And so I went up at least 4 times with my friend. And after the 4th time, we were so full. I didn't hold back on the sauces or anything. So full. I thought there was no way I was eating the rest of the day. I went for a 45-minute walk and I legitimately felt like I didn't eat after. Because the cool thing is the body has the way that the muscles are set up within your transverse abdominis, within your stomach, to actually help really work your food. It works your food through your digestive tract that much better. And then you'll feel like you actually didn't eat nearly as much, plus the water. And it also will bring down your blood sugar, your blood glucose from actually expelling some of the calories. We're not trying to do a calorie balance here. I'm just helping you digest your food better. Magnesium citrate is another great tool that I routinely use for my digestive system. I might have a little bit extra after those meals, so it does flush it down that much better. Instead of just one pill of magnesium citrate, which is about 150, I'll have 200, maybe 300 milligrams of that. And then a protein evening shake, as I'd already mentioned, having this in your mindset when you're thinking about maybe reach for another piece of food, I can always have a protein shake at home, is a great way for you to realize that I can pull out and I can have something that keeps me away from maybe the cookies or whatever after that meal is respectively done. Mindset strategies is going to be a major, major part here. Now, I'm an emotional eater, so that's why I'm going to dive into this a lot, because I've been trying to understand this more and more and more every year. And these strategies have been so impactful for me. I'll start off with just mindful eating. Like, what is mindful eating? Well, it is paying attention to what you're eating when you're eating it. It is slowing down and chewing your food slowly. I remember the first time I ever heard that someone said, you got to slowly eat, you got to chew your food more. It like upset me for some reason. I'm like, no, that's not my problem. And it absolutely is, because you're not paying attention to the food enough. You're just so consumed by the idea of consuming food that there's actually a pleasure between starting the food and finishing the food that you're not spending enough time with. And so chewing your food more makes a really big difference. And what I really noticed, even in my day-to-day food, but for sure when I'm at these events, asking yourself in your head, how good is this? And ask it like routinely through each of your bites. And you'll find that you're that much more present and you get that much more of an experience out of it. Remember, when you're taking bites too once in a while, put down your fork, have a sip of water, even just putting down your fork, looking in the room, having a sip of water or whatever beverage you have, and to maybe talk to someone, because again, it doesn't get you in this trance of just hammering the food. From there, you want to even discuss the food with others. As I mentioned, talking to someone, ask a question, because when you ask questions, people become more interested in talking to you. But if you ask a question about the food, it's actually a lot of fun. It actually helps you share that experience of the food with the next individual. When I did my prep last year, I talk about this all the time. The most impactful thing for me enjoying my foods, because I would have a treat meal once a week with Angelina. And when I shared it with her, it was so much more fun. And when I had it by myself, it was like kind of a pretty quick experience. And it didn't feel as significant. It's like watching a movie with someone versus not. It's like watching TV with someone versus not. And so you will actually really enjoy that food that much more if you talk about it a little bit throughout the experience. You also don't want to seek fullness throughout this. Fullness is going to be really hard to detect, because you're probably going to overthink yourself and think that you got more room. Plus, fullness is a delayed experience. You want to actually just have experienced the food, right? You're going to always crave more with hyperpalatable foods. So it's normal to crave more, and you want to think about what's the appropriate serving for you. And maybe minimize second servings of things, whether it's appetizers or your actual main plate, but definitely think of twice about the third servings. At that point, we want to consider, maybe I could take this to go. Maybe whoever my guest is, or whoever I'm a guest of, they're actually okay with me taking something home. And I tell you what, that was probably one of the most impactful things that I've changed from starting to go out and having that experience of controlling the amount of food I had. When I was on my prep, I would always take home what I needed to. I'd have the right amount. And right after the bread, I was super nervous about going out to dinners because like, oh man, I'm going to overconsume. I'm not going to hit my calories. And then it's like, wait a minute, I just need to bring food home. And then I did it. I finally walked away from finishing the whole plate and I brought it home and I had it later, hit my calories, no problem. And it's a super empowering thing to realize you don't have to finish that plate or you don't have to have thirds and you can still experience this food again later. And just remember that satiety is delayed. It doesn't actually give you that indication when you're in hyperpalatable foods and you're having a hard time really even recognizing if you're full enough. So you kind of want to wait 10 to 20 minutes to even know with drinking enough water and you'll feel it later. I guarantee it. So here's a major mental shift is you need to outsmart the scarcity mindset because it's the holidays. It's only around this time of year, right? That's bullshit. It's actually any time of the year. It's not like the government puts a restriction on baking gingerbread cookies as of December 26th. And it's not like you can't manage to find out where you can get yourself a candy cane the next day. It's just that we get this idea it's only this place in time. Now, I understand that maybe it's your mom's holiday baking, maybe it's your grandma's holiday baking that you really want to actually enjoy on that respective day. I can respect that. But again, maybe you could ask them to cook it another day and just don't get caught in the whole idea of scarcity because it's your body just trying to convince yourself as an excuse to overconsume your calories. When you actually think about it in some regards, to me, it might be a bit of an animalistic instinct because previously, and this is a general problem with overconsuming calories, is we're in an environment where our calories are now easy to consume and easy to get. So when we have hyperpalatable things that have a lot of energy, your body's like, oh, that's a lot of energy. We should eat a lot of it because energy was actually really hard to come by for thousands of years. So now we have a scarcity mindset already built into us. Then you have a scarcity mindset of being a yo-yo dieter. And then you have the holidays. So when you add all of those up, you have to start just cutting one of those off and be like, that's a fucking lie, man. I can get it anytime I want. And I can take some food home, right? So remember, before you feel full, just stop and say, I can have a protein shake when I get home. And you might be able to pull yourself out of it. And by the time you get home, you probably won't be hungry. Now, you got to shift your mindset to long-term, not scarcity, not the immediate. We're now long-term creatures in human nature, right? So your craving and your emotions is very much in the moment, and I want you to sit on it and to feel it. Okay, now this sounds a little bit like weird. What does it mean, feel it? If you have an urge to continue to eat, to have thirds, to have another whatever it is, and that urge, it's in your body, it's physically a body signal to you, and you think you really need to do it. But you need to sit on it and just ask yourself, is that real? Do I really, really, really need it? And then keep questioning it. Keep questioning it. Like not to overwill it, but to a degree you need will. And then just ask yourself internally, really at the deep level, who else could I be in this situation? Who do I want to be long term? And then if you can ask yourself that in the right tone, at the right time, when you're sitting with this emotion, you might be able to actually imagine yourself, hey, what if I didn't have this and I brought some food home? I could actually have it over the next few days. I could digest my food pretty well if I just had this. The only way for you to know that that's the right choice is if you practice it. It's like imagining the first time you ever got on a bike. Fucking terrifying. I know I was. I remember my mom got mad at me because I kept messing it up and I didn't want to do it. She's like, all right, don't do it. And after practicing it, it was pretty easy. But this is very similar. You need to practice having the ability to say, I have had enough and I've had an enjoyable amount and I can walk away and I'm not really missing anything. And what I really want you to do is I call it future casting because you're going to predict the future of how you're going to feel, even when you haven't felt this before. It's like going into a workout thinking, oh, I'm so tired. I'm not going to like this workout. Then you do it like, holy shit, I feel amazing. That's what this experience will be like for you. And to practice it. Now, it's all well and good. All this thing is good intention on all these things on the mindset. But what's going to make an even bigger impact for you is what's your why? Like, what's your motivation for whatever you're doing with your fitness? Because I can say calorie deficit, maintenance, I can say all these things, but like, who are you doing it for? What are you doing it for? Is it for your kids so you can get better shape? Is it for you because you really actually need to work on your self-confidence? Whatever you think it is, I want you to write it down. I want you to write it down meaningfully. And if your why doesn't give you chills, if your why, and almost like say it 5 times. So whatever your reason is, why is that your reason? And ask it again. Why is that your reason? And ask it again and again, and go as deep to the core as you can. And if it doesn't give you chills, I don't think you're digging deep enough. And it's going to be really hard to have the willingness, to have the motivation to do all this, unless your why is so clear to you that your personal discomfort is inherently worth it. Because it's going to be uncomfortable. That's just what it is. But bring your why in front of you, even when you're sitting down at dinner, and you'll have that much more of a better chance. So we have to caution the binge bubble. The binge bubble is very simply the thing that it's going to add up for time and time, and you eventually just want to pop. You just want to give in. This isn't much different than the yo-yo, or I always like to call it the willpower pendulum, where you're just holding back until you give it up. But I like the word binge bubble because it happens in an instant. And it phonetically sounds good because there's B's in a row. It just sounds good. Binge bubble. Binge bubble. Okay. Yeah. I don't want things to pop on me. Right. So building up pressure of discipline until you pop and you binge and you're in a trance and you just want to keep eating until, okay, I'm going to stop for about 10 minutes. Now I'll keep eating. And then it's like, oh, it hurts. Okay, I'll wait until it doesn't hurt so much. And then I eat some more. And I know this so familiarly because this is exactly how I spent many, many Christmases. And you just say, fuck it, I'm in it now. And now I'm just going to go hard. And this is the point you need to resist the most. It's the fuck it. We're going to get away from the fuck it zone. We're just going to not allow ourselves to go in there no matter what. That's the most important thing for you to recognize. I want you to have the idea you can't fuck this up. You can't mess it up. I got this from Jordan Sayat, and it's super impactful that people need to have this positivity mindset that if you don't believe you're ever going to quit, you can't fuck it up. You will succeed eventually. It's the best chance you have at success anyways, is just believing it's a matter of time, and say it throughout. Now, let's say the plan isn't going perfectly. You are over your calories, you are splurging, you're borderline binging, you're borderline, right? As long as we say, I can't fuck this up, as long as I believe I haven't totally given up on myself, I haven't said the word fuck it yet, I haven't said it, you have that much more of a chance of it making a difference. It empowers you to take control at any given time, even when things aren't going well. Because I know when someone's in a binging trance, and again, I know a binging trance to the point where you eat and it hurts and you're still eating, that binging trance is really difficult. But what you can do is come to grips with the moment any chance you get. You're in the middle of the trance. Okay, I can't fuck this up as long as I make sure I'm still trying. Even if you're physically eating, I'm still going to try. And it'll empower you to take control at that moment. And you can eventually be like, okay, at least I can stop here. Maybe I am at 4,000 calories instead of the 3,000, but I'm going to stop here. And that's actually where I started controlling my binge eating, was when I started to be present during the binge eating episodes. And when I finally said, I could keep eating because I normally binge beyond this point, but I'm going to stop here. And that was enough to start inching in the right direction. Now, the truth bomb here is that you're very likely going to overdo your calories. You're not very likely going to nail your calories 100%. It's not a big deal. Now, 3,500 calories is equal to a pound of body fat. That's a lot of calories. So even in the event that someone has a calorie maintenance of 2,000 calories, they would need to eat 5,500 calories on a day in order to have a pound of body fat. And that is doable, by the way. I'm certain I've done it. But the important thing there is it's still not a big deal. And the reason why I want you to realize it's not a big deal, it's not that we want to go and say it's okay to have 5,500 calories. It's that you want to have a concept of, even if you're doing pretty bad, it's not that big of a deal. It's to prevent the pop. It's to prevent the idea that, oh, I've fucked it all up. We don't want to put so much pressure on ourselves to think that we're an utter failure if we're not perfect. It's to get rid of that perfection mindset and to honestly have a good enough mindset to have, this is me today. This is the best will I have today. And, even if you do a little bit more than you wanted to, so what? You're going to do better in the next day as long as you believe you can't fuck this up. So we also have events around the events like staff parties. Now, all the same rules apply at these staff parties, but typically what people have a bigger challenge of isn't just the total calories, which you should consider, it's the liquid calories. It's more so, what do those liquid calories, the alcohol, end up making you do or say in front of your boss? Or you could end up like Elaine and dancing like no one's watching, even though everyone is. Which, by the way, I respect you if you do. I think that's awesome. I am one of those people. But that's basically what you got to consider at these events is the total calories, because whether it is appetizers and alcohol and food or whatever it might be, calories are still calories. And it actually can be that much more difficult when you're having liquid calories to regulate what you're consuming. So in that case, just make sure that most of your appetizers are going to be protein anchors, and it can be a little bit better, and just judgment calls, do the best you can. When it comes to alcohol, it literally messes up your judgment calls. So the last thing I'll recommend on that is just have your number set for both drinks and appetizers, so you have the right amount. And how many times are you allowed to go on the dance floor and dance like Elaine? That's a very important number to stick to. And the day after the event is super important. So day after, whether it's Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, whatever, and you want to have some, fun, maybe there's still some food around, but you need to have some normalcy. Now, maintenance is a really good idea at this day because you want to get yourself comfortable with eating food. And not going into the yo-yo is really what we're trying to do, right? We don't be like, oh man, it is so bad. We want to actually just get back to some idea of normalcy and not overcompensate. So what I really recommend is the whole food cleanse. And I call it a cleanse. I hate the fucking word cleanse, by the way, but it does clean. I don't even like that word. Reset, maybe just some other word. Even that's been used by diets these days, but it does kind of reset your palate. If you get used to just digesting normal food, you'll remember, oh, I don't have to feel bloated. And then you'll actually be like, hey, I'm actually satiated from my normal meal plan. This feels good. And I recommend for one day. And the sooner you can do it after your event, the better. Because what I found in my own experience is that if I've had one, especially two events back to back, I get used to just grabbing something quick and being okay with it, and just having a little bit more of that and being okay with it. And I need to not be okay with just a little extra here and there, because those calories are going to add up pretty quick and almost feel like a need and a normal idea that, hey, I'm okay. It's okay to have cookies all the time between every single meal, which if you fit in your calories, it's one thing, but that's really hard to do. So if you have just one day of whole foods, you will find on the next day, that's when it's a good time to sprinkle in those foods again, because you've controlled your appetite a little bit better with higher satiety foods, and you're going to digest food way better, rather than continuing to have the same types of foods that just continue to make you feel poorly. And caution that why the F not zone, like the why the fuck not zone, is very big risk, because that's why I want you to do the whole food palate cleanse. If you have, like, between Christmas and New Year's, it's the most important time to have some normalcy come back, and then slowly ease your way back into the deficit over the course of a couple of days, rather than just, clean cutting it right going into it, or trying to actually just fuck it, not care. Try to have somewhere in between, as always. Feel like working out? It's a great idea. Working out's usually a great idea, but it is your holidays, and I don't want you to feel guilty just because you don't want to. I'm an exercise addict. I could work out every day, 2-3 hours a day. And I just try not to, because I have to do my job. I have other things I have to do. So baseline would be walking. I'm always going to encourage walking. I'm going to say most of us should have time for walking. Now, I don't have a family of several kids and cooking dinners and all that stuff. If you're busy, you're busy, but walking will help you a lot, especially eating and digestion. As I already mentioned, post-meal, it'll help that blood sugar, and you'll feel way less bloated. So walking is the number one baseline I recommend you try to make time for. And just a good step count. If you're going to be moving around, cleaning or whatever it might be, that's a great way for you to stay active on the day. Let's say you had somewhere around 1,200 or 12K steps, or maybe 14K steps, and you didn't get a workout in. Well, you actually probably burnt quite a few calories just from having a good step count. So it's not a super important thing to have to go to the gym, but strength training does have a benefit in a surplus to muscle building. Considering a few extra reps and a few extra rest pause sets is a really good thing. So, we'll talk about muscle building and rest pause sets shortly, but basically this is a good time to want to do strength training, because your body can actually build the muscle. You do not want to punish yourself and train to earn your food. It's a really dangerous mindset that we can get into, especially the punishment idea. Train to use your food, because strength training uses your food to build your body. And I think that's really constructive. There's a bit of a different narrative on there. And remember, walk to digest, not to necessarily completely equate the calories. You're probably not going to, but it doesn't hurt to have a high step count. And I think that's a lot more mentally beneficial to actually just get a high step count. You can still do it with your family, be more encouraging for your family to go outside during the winter, maybe go sledding or something like that. And it could be really fun. But cardio for calories is super dangerous, because then you're always going to team up the two. And that's just where people end up having a really dangerous behavior. Binge eating disorder actually has a compensatory method of anything to compensate for the calories. So if you binge eat and then you say, okay, I got to go on the treadmill for 45 minutes, you're getting into that spectrum of compensation. And so it's a very dangerous game that you're playing when you do it in that sort of a narrative. Now, training volume is the benefit of muscle building, right? So if you want to build muscle, it's volume. Increasing volume is going to help you. Now, ideally, you're going to do this over the weeks leading up, not just the week of, but definitely the week of. You're going to want to do it as well. And it's not just that one respective day. As I mentioned, it's over time. Hypertrophy and muscle building is actually a slower game. You're talking about grams of a muscle per day. So that's why you want to think about increasing volume over time. And again, don't think of working off your training. You're trying to build up your body and use it. Now, holiday volume is a great time. It's like during the holidays, let's try to get in there a little bit more for strength training and consider increasing your sets near failure, because more sets is what adds more muscle. Now, as I mentioned, rest pause sets is something you can do. If you're not familiar with it, I get this with my clients all the time. You take a set near failure to the point where you can't move the muscle fast. Like that's when you know you're at near failure. And then you rest for about 10 to 20 seconds. And then you do another 3 or 4 reps, whatever it takes you again to failure. Now that's almost like doing another set, because those are very effective reps for muscle building because you can't move them fast. So the more of those sets you do, the better. So let's say you typically do 3 hard sets near failure, then you do some rest pause on that last one. It's like accumulating more sets to add more muscle. Do this responsibly, because it can really mess up your muscle, but it's a very efficient way where you're not spending way more time in the gym in order to get the sets you need for the muscle building. Now, I want you to think about more training volume and strength training, because it does lead to an increased metabolism, especially if you've been coming off a calorie deficit for many weeks. Your body's probably adapting and actually slowing down your metabolism. So this is a way to actually recoup it and build up the muscle that you could have been losing from your calorie deficit over a long period of time. And this is probably a small increase. But again, over a few weeks, you're actually leading into it, starting this week, going into the next week and the next week, it can actually help you a little bit more. And it's just to actually think that it's more important than doing cardio. That's the more dangerous and not so beneficial way. But if you get more strength training, it's going to help you. Now, let's say I can't get to the gym's closed, I'm busy and all that stuff. I just recommend you do something throughout the day. I actually used to do this all the time. As long as I had a muscle burn, I felt good. I would do, and this was honestly on Christmas Eve, I did 500 bodyweight squats. I was at work and I would try to get it done over the course of an hour. It was actually around 45 minutes or something like that. You get to the point where your muscles are burning. And if I could do the 500 squats, I felt good. And I actually did just feel good doing something that day while I mixed it in throughout the day. I made sure every set was actually really tough, get a good muscle burn. You could also do push-up challenge, try to get 200 push-ups over the course of a day. But then from there, try to balance it out with your pushes and pulls. So have maybe bands to do band pull part and match the reps that you do, or prone YTWs, which you just face down and you're doing the YTW patterns. Somewhere's around the 200 as well, and you'll feel a nice chest and back pump doing that. So these are some more time efficient ways for you to be able to get that workout in around the holidays if you don't have gym access. Now, some discussion points for you to think about. Let's start off with something simple as like, have you ever done this? What was the most successful family event, social event that you went to and you didn't have too much and you felt like that was just the right amount of everything? And I want you to think about, if you have had this experience, what was the motivation? Because that's an important thing to start with. How did I care that much about it in order to say no and to do the right thing? Then think about what you felt like after, because that should be a part of the motivation. It's like, well, I felt really good because I didn't, feel like I binged too much. I didn't feel really bloated, and that was really rewarding. Now, if you haven't had any of these experiences, now's a good time to practice, because you can have this experience, but you need to know that the experience is rewarding in and of itself once you complete it. It's hard during it, just like going to the gym for the first time. And after it, it's like, wow, that's actually a nice way to live. And then from there, I'd love to have you think about what's your favorite Christmas food? What's going to be the really hard one for you? And I can already think of a few. Well, alcohol for sure will be tough for me. Lefse will be a tough one for me. And any cookies for sure will be very difficult for me. Some part of me hopes that my sisters won't bake some good cookies, especially peanut butter cookies, because sometimes the cookies are okay. And then sometimes they're just too damn good, especially if my mom makes the score cookies. Oh, I don't have a chance. I don't have a chance. Or do I? I do, right? Because I'm not going to give up on myself. What is your biggest challenge this year? That's basically where I was going with the Christmas food. But what's the other challenge? Is it stress? Is it the time? Whatever it might be, you got to think about, okay, this is what I really need to think about, because this is going to be my biggest challenge for these events. And what's your why? Coming back to the motivation. Make sure you know why you're trying to do this the best you can, and hold it right there, near and dear. So you might still have some questions here, like how many calories do I have? What's the right kind of protein? How many grams of protein? DM me. Any questions that you have, I can help you. I have more free resources for you. I have a training on how to figure out your calories so that you can actually use a calorie calculator. And then I walk you through how to actually determine if that calorie calculator is accurate. And then we have trainings around protein to make sure you're having the right amount. And most importantly, the right kinds, the ones that have the right amount of protein in them for you to hit your goal and make sure you're not having predominantly fat. And so any of these kind of challenges, just reach out. Now, if you just overall think you want to take this stuff serious, you're curious about the RQ training nutrition systems, just DM me. Don't hesitate to ask for help, because I get great success with my clients. And you can see that I take this stuff very seriously, especially when it comes to helping people who have issues with binge eating and yo-yo dieting and still love to train. That's what I do best. People who love to train, but have a hard time with the food. I will get you to where you want to go. And I will have you getting the physique you want while still eating cookies while you do it, because you know I am. And so with that being said, I'm going to give you an additional 2 months off for you watching this recording, because you spent all this time watching this whole recording. So clearly you take your stuff serious. And so if you tell me the key word, Christmas cookies, I will give you an additional 2 months off of any membership that you sign up for, and we will get you to where you want to go. So that about wraps it up for me in this presentation. So I'll finish it off with something simple. And that is, of course, happy holidays. I truly hope, no matter what happens with your plans, I don't care how many cookies you eat or don't eat, as long as you're happy doing it, as long as you enjoy your life in this holiday season, I'm happy for you. And I truly hope you and your loved ones have a great one this year. Thank you so much for joining. And just so you know, I have a mantra within my program. Life is not about the pursuit of happiness, but it's about the happiness within pursuit. And I believe that holiday cookies are there while you're doing it. I'll catch you next time.